Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Computer History Museum. I'm John Holler, the CEO, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight. Such an amazing crowd. On behalf of our Board of Trustees, our staff, our members, and the amazing 200 volunteers who keep this place running so well. I also want to say thank you tonight to our partners, Logitech and SRI, and in particular, I want to thank Logitech Chairman Guarino DeLuca and CEO Bracken Darrell, and SRI President Kurt Carlson and Vice President Alice Resnick. We'll be hearing from Guarino and Kurt later this evening. Tonight, as many of you know, is the 45th anniversary of the mother of all demos. It's certainly no accident that this special evening is scheduled on a December 9th and to have a crowd this size, because Doug always could turn crowds of this size out wherever he went to talk about this. So many other nights have been scheduled just like this on this anniversary before. But tonight we gather not to remember that live demonstration in 1968, as riveting and history-making as it was, and you'll see a little bit of it tonight later on in a film. Rather, we're here this evening to honor and remember Doug Engelbart, the husband, the father, the colleague, the revolutionary. Doug's influence is felt in the world every day, and so in many ways, his work is its own memorial. That will be a major theme this evening. And in reflecting on that in the past few days, on the centrality of Doug's work to modern life, I've been reminded of the story of the brilliant 17th century British architect, Sir Christopher Wren. After the Great Fire of 1666 destroyed much of central London, Christopher Wren led the task of surveying the damage and ultimately designing a new plan for the city. Now, London in 1666, before the fire, was cramped and crowded, not much of a daily life for the rank and file. It was so densely packed that the Great Fire, in a matter of mere hours, destroyed 13,000 houses and 70 parish churches. Christopher Wren envisioned a London that would be more human, more open, more scaled to human terms and human needs, with wide streets, substantially better housing, more appealing design, more access to natural light. Wren's great plan included the restoration and expansion of St. Paul's Cathedral, which had been heavily damaged. That plan took more than 4 decades to carry out. Yet even today, nearly 300 years later, much of central London still reflects Wren's vision and contemporary thinking. So much so that his epitaph on the stone that marks his resting place in St. Paul's says simply, "If you seek his monument, look around you." Doug Engelbart's work, which is all around us, was not undertaken in the aftermath of great destruction, but in the promise of the great construction of life in the information age. He too worked on a human scale. His tools were not brick and mortar, but technology and creativity and human capacity. He envisioned the space to be created by computing as a space on a human scale, a space for the rest of us, and a collaborative way of working that always placed people at the center. Thus, in many ways, to remember Doug Engelbart is simply to observe the 21st century world. Tonight, many who knew Doug very well, not least of which are his beloved Karen and Christina, are gathered here at the museum to honor him. We hope to place his work in a broader context, to measure its ongoing impact, at least in some small way, and to create that space where public appreciation for Doug's dent in the world can simply flow. In the first half of the evening, we'll hear from 8 people who had special relationships with Doug, both personally and professionally. Museum curator Mark Weber will then follow to talk about how our Internet and Web History Program is collecting and preserving an important part of the work of Doug and his teams. Then in the second half of the event, John Markoff of the New York Times will moderate a conversation with 2 people who have been deeply influenced by and are carrying on what we call the Engelbart Challenge in both the implementation of technology and the way we work together. To begin this evening, it's my honor to introduce as our first speaker, Doug's wife, Karen Engelbart.
I am so thrilled to be participating in this, and thank you all so much for coming. And Logitech, SRI, and Computer History Museum, delighted that we're celebrating them together tonight. I thought in case I couldn't get through this whole thing, I would just cut to the chase with a synopsis and just say, oh, how I adored the man. If I counted the ways, we'd be here all night. Doug was a madly, deeply lovely person, inside and out, personally and professionally. I'm honored to know him, to have loved him and been loved by him, and there is a lot more light in the world because of Doug's vision of who he was as a person, of his enlightened view of humanity, what it could be, and what he has achieved for us all. So that's the short version. Here's the long version. I met Doug 15 years ago today as a reporter. It was a fateful and glorious writing assignment. We were celebrating his 30th anniversary, the unfinished revolution. I have since learned that Doug's vision for humanity was a bright light that could not be put out by the darkness of foolish paradigms and commitment to conventional thinking that surrounded him. I believe Doug's dream was based on an elevated view of humankind. It was a noble vision from a noble man in hopes of an enhanced, nobler humankind. I think Doug was unknowingly projecting himself, his own greatness, depth, and breadth onto others, but in his characteristic, humble way. Doug was a highly evolved person, exceptionally intelligent, but generally felt no smarter or no better than others, a little bit like Einstein in that way. So he expected from everyone else the same degree of dedication to problem solving and enhancing collective IQ and collaborating that he had dedicated his life to. He was disappointed at first. In his commitment to and desire for human augmentation, Doug was operating in stark contrast to prevailing paradigms that didn't have nearly his faith in humankind. Two prevailing fads in the 60s and beyond were artificial intelligence, which focuses on enhancing the capacity of machines, and technology for the masses that would be easy to learn and natural to use. This later trend was enormously frustrating to Doug, as we all know. He wanted people to augment their intelligence by engaging tools and strategies that were commensurate with the complex problems that threatened to do them in. He was very aware, even as a 25-year-old, that humankind was kind of on a collision course. Doug used the image of the tricycle and the bicycle to illustrate how wrong it was to dumb down technology. Refusing to learn appropriately a sophisticated and mature technology was like choosing a tricycle over a bicycle. He was basically saying, hey kids, it's time to grow up. But the culture chose arrested development. When people rejected Doug's complex but vastly improved tools, it was as if they were saying, no thanks, Doug, the primitive tools are easier. If you're requiring us to scale steep learning curves that require more effort, we would just as soon remain our Neanderthal selves. I think I read that Woz and Doug said that Doug was like a god. It may have been in reference to the vastness of Doug's vision or his achievements, or maybe his deep and pervasive goodness as a person. I concur, though for decades, Doug seemed to me to be more like a prophet, calling in the wilderness, speaking to a deaf and blind world, bearing light, and sad for humanity that it wouldn't take its heed. Doug believed he had a vision and strategies that could save humankind from itself, from its collision course, problems that were coming on with increased complexity, intensity, and speed. He believed that even solutions to problems were generating more problems, and the only way to get ahead was through enhancing our intelligence collectively with smarter tools. Without saying it, Doug believed we could become higher, stronger, smarter, better versions of ourselves. And without knowing it, without ever putting it in those words, Doug indeed took on what I would call, Doug took on what I would call the divine mandate for us all, to be as gods. I believe Doug was one of the immortal souls who took seriously the weight of glory of being a fully alive human being. There are some of the images that come up for me as they relate to Doug and the divine are that he had an exalted view of humankind. He saw its potential for greatness. He ushered in the dawn of interactive computing. He remained invisible for for eons, in spite of the fact that he created tangible worlds that enhance intelligence. And he lived for humanity as if love were the ultimate reality, as if the work of enhancing and evolving the human species was the most critical work of all. Doug's lifetime pursuit was probably driven as much by a sense of duty as by love. While Doug used the word love at home a lot, I don't think I ever heard him use it once in relationship to what motivated him in his lifetime pursuit. But I don't see how Doug could have persevered in his dream for humankind in the face of such daunting obstacles, in the face of rejection, of losing funding, of having projects he earned taken away from him, of being dismissed, of all the hits he took during his career, if it weren't for his genuine, undying love of the species and of people individually. I think duty drops out, gets disheartened and exhausted when things get tough, but love never quits. When Einstein discovered and fell in love with Mozart as a way to learn to play the violin, he said love is such a better teacher than duty. And I think that Doug was in love with humankind and all its potentials, and that's what kept him going. Einstein was a cultural icon too, who, like Doug, bucked conventional thinking and was dismissed when conventional people were in charge. Doug, like Einstein, didn't have the stomach or the instinct for political warfare. He had to overcome political obstacles and press on with his earth-shattering insights in spite of the conventional thinking that was surrounding him. I think it must have been love as much as duty that kept them both going. Doug was such a delight in so many ways on the personal level. I love the complexity, the paradox, the juxtaposition of the man. He was a country boy futurist, a visionary who developed highly sophisticated tools to fix a world full of complex problems, a highly evolved creature who made the world a collectively smarter place, and yet he never stopped referring to himself as a naive country kid. A friend of ours said that country boy futurist sounds a bit like space cowboy. I sometimes did think of Doug as an astronaut with the right stuff who wanted to take us to the stratosphere of our capabilities. Now, in the personal realm, just a few words. Earthworms, organic gardening, sailing, backpacking, beer making, folk dancing, and slingshots. Doug, to me, was physically, socially, temperamentally, creatively, and intellectually adorable. I get to use that word even this serious, hallowed hall of technical sophistication. While you wouldn't use the word, most of you already know that Doug was intellectually adorable. It's why we're all here celebrating him. But there are two small incidents that speak to that and demonstrate that he was already facilitating his own evolution using formative tools and dynamic knowledge repositories that would enhance his knowledge base and facilitate his own evolution. When Doug was young, I think this is particularly adorable. When Doug was young, he memorized the Boy Scout virtues. And later, with me as a grown-up, seizing a teachable moment with children, he would recite them very fast and be very pleased with himself. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. They are all so adorable, and they are all so Doug, and I think we can see that why he was an exemplary scout. Equally adorable, in his 30s, he typed up words on one side of note cards with their definition on the other. Apparently, he was testing himself. He was doing iterations. And I thought that you might be interested in some of the vocabulary that he found. It was almost like he was using flashcards, only it was for a very sophisticated, highly educated grown-up. And these are some of the words that he used that I found recently typed on note cards, very kind of prescient. Feckless grumbling, morphological structures of groups, synergistic, exemplar, élan vital, and finally, anthropocentric. In the time Doug and I were together, he went through seasons of varying degrees of happiness. As I mentioned, for many years, he felt he was in the wilderness, and his frequent refrain to people were, "You just don't get it." But in the later season, it was different. His temperament was characterized by contentment, love of life, and hope. Some of the reasons for his hope was that his desert was becoming to blossom as a rose. People were finally getting it. They were tirelessly working towards the world Doug had in mind. And I want to give a few examples. Peter Yim's work on ontology, Mei Lin's leadership in healthcare at the federal and state level, Bill Dahl's improvement community, Ade Mabagunji's work at Stanford and in India and Africa, Dino Karabag's Knowledge Federation, Jack Park's Knowledge Garden, and finally, Sam Hahn's Program for the Future, continuing work that he had started with Doug at Bootstrap Alliance decades ago. These active, dynamic, international pursuits that are carrying on Doug's legacy, which he was able to work with them on, made him happy. And finally, personally, Doug's affection, goodness, intelligence, quick wit, love of learning and language, playfulness transformed our everyday routines into magical moments. It was a rapturous love all around. He created a force field of domestic tranquility, I'm happy to report, and happiness beyond my wildest dreams. He turned our water into wine. As I have said before, Doug inspired more intelligent life, generated more worthy ideas, ignited more glorious, noble, collaborative visions and endeavors than he knew, and he won scores of awards for it. But what I admired and loved about him the most, and what I'm honored to have experienced, was his highly advanced capability of loving us all so well. Thank you.
Hi, as the program says, I'm Bill English. I'm going to talk more about what Doug did, not Doug. But I probably knew him longer than anyone else here. I first met Doug in the early 60s when he and I were both in the magnetics program at SRI. In fact, at one point, Doug had written a paper in magnetics that was accepted by IEEE for a Philadelphia conference. But before he could give it, he got his first funding for what he really wanted to do. And he wasn't about to go back and talk about magnetics. So he asked me if I would go back and present the paper for him, which I did. I went back and presented the paper. When I got back to SRI, he asked if I'd like to come and see what he was thinking about. And I went over and he showed me the beginning computer that he had and what he was talking about, and asked if I would join him to help develop the facility. And that didn't take much thinking on my part. I jumped at the chance, and it was a great opportunity. We had begun, Doug had been able to get a fairly small computer, a 160A, that one of the programmers at SRI had used to implement some of the beginnings of Doug's concept of text processing. 160A was a very small computer. It had 8K of 12-bit words and a 32K drum. You couldn't do much with it. But it worked and actually did the basics of what Doug wanted. In addition to that, we were able to run the experiments on pointing devices with it. We had a contract from NASA to evaluate pointing devices, and we did that, a number of different devices, and you know that's where the mouse originated. Just a quick word about the mouse. The first mouse was really a planimeter in a small box. Now, a planimeter was a device to determine the area of a two-dimensional space, but just by marking a pointer around the perimeter. It was first proposed by Johann Hermann in 1814. So you see the mouse has a very long history. A man named Amsler Lafon actually implemented the first planimeter and demonstrated its capabilities. in 1854. Now, if Amsler LaFon had had a decent display at that time, we might have had a mouse then. But that had to wait for Doug. I remember Doug showing me a diagram of the planimeter and suggesting that it might be used to point at objects on the display. It sounded great to me, and with the great help of the SRI machine shop, I built a model of the planimeter that would fit in a small handheld box and drive potentiometers that were in turn read by the computer to position a cursor. And we used that in connection with other pointing devices for the NASA experiment. The mouse was a clear winner, I mean, way ahead of anybody else, and it still is today, as you can tell. Since I was managing development of the computer facility, I'll tell you a little more about that. The first improvement in the 160 was the 3100. It was a more powerful computer, but the real breakthrough came when we got an SDS 940. That was a time-sharing machine. It let us drive multiple workstations at one time. It's the first time we could have more than one person sitting at a display. We decided to use 5-inch rack-mounted displays, high resolution, with a high-resolution TV camera mounted in front of each one. That means that we could drive the video to a workstation, and it didn't take any complex cabling to drive a display. In fact, that's one of the reasons we were able to do the 68 demo. We only had to transmit video from SRI to the Civic Center in San Francisco. And to do that, Pac Bell was wonderful. I gave them the problem, and they found a place on Skyline Boulevard where they could put a truck that could see both SRI and Civic Center. And they picked up the signal from SRI, transmitted it to a second truck, and then to Civic Center. And it worked beautifully. I don't know who did it, but he deserves a lot of credit. He really took on the challenge of making it work. With the great success of the demo, we were able, well, let me say one thing first. The video displays also gave us the ability to locate workstations freely anywhere we wanted. And we chose an open plan workspace. We talked SRI into tearing down the interior partitions in one area of one building and made that an open space, and we could experiment with alternative ways of working, and that was very nice. With the great success of the demo, we were able to expand the workspace, our programming staff primarily, and had places to put them. We were able to hire the best and the brightest. So that's my story about the beginning of the system that supported Doug's work. Thank you.
My name's Harvey Laitman, and I was in the software development group at the Augmentation Research Center, Doug's group, from 1970 to 1980. I wasn't at the 1968 demo, but there was a repeat performance in 1969, October 1969. It was at the Hilton Hotel in a meeting of the American Society for Information Sciences. I hadn't thought much about that demo since then. I hadn't seen it. In fact, I didn't know it had been recorded. While I was preparing my remarks for tonight, I of course Googled and discovered that there's a digitized version of that demo at the Internet Archive, archive.org. And there are many, many other very interesting programs there that essentially keep track of the progress that was made in the group for the next several decades. But the advance in the system between the 1968 demo that I think all of you are familiar with and the 1969 demo that I urge you to look at is really striking, and it really illustrates one of the key underlying principles of our work at SRI and Doug's basic philosophy: bootstrapping, coevolution of the technical and human systems, and a consistent user interface. In bootstrapping, the developers of the tools and methods use them to evolve the environment, initially targeting users who were programmers and writers and later members of other knowledge work communities. The progress that was made from December 68 to October 69 is an amazing example of bootstrapping. We had probably the most extraordinary software development environment that evolved over a number of years, including a meta compiler, tree meta, that was used to create our block-structured algorithmic languages and let us bootstrap ourselves onto new machines after the SDS 940, the DEC PDP-10, PDP-11, DEC 20s. Tree meta was also used to write our end-user device-independent interface language, command meta language. We eventually were able to separate the user interface onto front-end machine from command execution capabilities, a back-end that communicated with the user over the ARPANET. Doug really felt it was important that we didn't just focus on technology. We also needed to focus on ourselves and on our users. He felt that the technical and human systems would co-evolve. As the users became more experienced in the use of the system, they would find more things to do with it. They would find more tools that were in the workshop, and they could extend their experience. This was possible because we had a very consistent user interface framework across all the software extensions to the system and all devices that we use to access the system. Back in the 70s and 80s, we also provided the system on typewriter terminals as well as two-dimensional displays with the mouse and key set. On the Wikipedia article on NOS, I saw the following under a section called Decline of and Succession of NOS. The downfall of NOS and subsequently of ARC in general was the program's difficult learning curve. NOS was not designed to be easy to learn. I think that's a major misunderstanding of what we were doing. The system had a very consistent language framework, but as you start to learn a language, you use a very simple vocabulary. As you become more sophisticated and experienced, your language capabilities would grow and increase. Doug really felt that the tools we developed were for knowledge workers. At first, individual knowledge workers on the CDC 3100, and later with time sharing, collaborating groups of knowledge workers, and eventually with our work on the ARPANET, geographically distributed groups. NOS wasn't just used by people at ARC, but rather users around the country at the Educational Testing Service, Bell Canada, Weyerhaeuser, Romer Development Center, and others. A major community that we supported was the ARPANET Network Information Center, and that's going to be the topic of my colleague Jake Feinler.
I'm Elizabeth Feinler, also known as Jake, and I was the principal investigator for the Network Information Center from, I think, 74 to 89 when I left. And so I had a long friendship with Doug, and he was also my mentor. I think by now we've established that Doug was a visionary. He had a vision of knowledge workers having all the information they needed at their fingertips via an online computer system. And he also envisioned that documents would be produced and easily exchanged back and forth across networks. And he also envisioned that document processing, such as writing them, editing them, abstracting, indexing, storing and retrieving documents would also be done online. By 1970, the NLS system had text editing, a hypertext journal system, and access to the ARPANET. And I think Doug saw an opportunity, to realize some of his ideas when he sought to bring the NIC project to SRI in 1970. The NIC was supposed to be an information hub for all the developers and users of the ARPANET, and it was funded by DARPA. I joined ARC in about 1972, and by that time, considerable work had been done on a rather sophisticated information center. Dick Watson, Mike Kudlick, Jacques Vallee, and Gene North, who were all heavy hitters in information technology, were brought in, and they worked closely with the ARC programmers and had developed a cataloging system, had established online and offline procedures, and we were producing and distributing important networking documents at that time. My first job was to produce what was called the Resource Handbook. The ARPANET was supposed to be a resource sharing network at those times, and so this was to document who was on the network and what they had by way of resources to share with other sites. But I'd like to step back a second and look at the environment at the time I joined ARC in 1972. Computers were huge. They took up a whole room, but they were very small in capacity compared to what we're used to now. And they cost about $1 million, give or take a little. They needed an air-conditioned room and dust-free environment, and they usually had a cadre of people that kept them up and going. The workstation cost somewhere around $100K, and there was no email, there was no World Wide Web, there was no font selection, there were no laser printers. The network in most systems could not handle graphics or video, and the ARPANET technology was evolving so fast it was like trying to hit a moving target to build a program on top of it. So you might say everything was either flaky or not there. The large indexing and abstracting services existed, but they were mostly as expensive hard copy subscriptions, and they were usually subscribed to by libraries. If they were automated, and most of them weren't, they contained only abstracts and indexes and not a complete document. And Doug's dream was that you would, just reach out and be able to get the document you wanted. So obtaining documents after you did a search was a long and laborious process, so it was hardly at your fingertips. Consequently, trying to provide an online information center available to all users across a computer network was a daunting task, and it gave new meaning to Doug's concept of bootstrapping. Doug probably said it best in a quote from a 1988 article that Harvey and he wrote, and it was published in Byte, and I'll read it here, a little excerpt from it. The bootstrapping approach, so important to the continuing evolution of the system, cause us to constantly undercut our world. As soon as we became used to ways of doing things, we replaced platforms to which we were just becoming accustomed. We needed to learn new roles, change attitudes, and adopt different methods because of growth in the technological system we ourselves were producing. I remember in one incident myself, I went into Doug's office. I was so frustrated. Nothing was working, and I really started to complain and bitch, and I said, oh, we couldn't run programs, the system was down, I couldn't find anybody to help me. We didn't, you know, the printer didn't come up with ink that was good enough for camera-ready copy, and maybe the sun didn't come up that day, I don't know. Anyway, I was on a roll, and Doug sat there, and he put his hands behind his head like he did, and leaned back in his chair, and he got that impish grin on his face, and he waited till I finished my core dump of complaints. And then he looked me right in the eye, and he said, what are you going to do about it? That was my aha moment. I got it. It just then dawned on me that we were working on a continuously evolving system, and then the real name of the game was, you know, adapt to it or die. And so I believe the beginning Nick had some very great ideas, but it very soon ran into problems, and many of them had to do with hardware, not software, in my opinion. The computers were too small to handle the number of people that wanted to log in and use the Nick services. And Doug only had one computer. It was I think a DEC 10 at the time I was there. But he had to develop NLS on it. He had to do research on it. He had to provide service to the ARPANET users on it, and he had to run catalogs and do test programs. The machine just wasn't big enough. I mean, it just wasn't enough compute power. But as computers were so expensive, that was all there was. But I think it was phenomenal that they did all the things they did on the computer, with the computer power that they had. Also, the network protocols were very diverse and some of them were very incompatible with each other at the time. So it was very hard for the NIC to have a consistent user interface that was available to everyone and suited everyone's needs. And then as time went on, emphasis on the use of the ARPANET changed. Originally, it was to be a resource sharing network, but as time went on, the emphasis changed to developing protocols. So the network eventually evolved out of NLS, or the NIC eventually evolved out of NLS, and we adapted to the network as it was changing over time. And Doug's dream of information at your fingertips probably didn't really take off until the World Wide Web came in as the killer app in the late 1980s. Then the pendulum really began to swing from offline to online. When we started, it was probably here, and by the 1980s and beyond where we are now, it's probably clear over here as far as access and online capabilities. So I think we can say that the web is now everybody's information center, and it's all at our fingertips. And we owe a lot of that to Doug and the ARC group in the early days. Thank you.
You don't need me to tell you. Douglas Engelbart was one of the greatest men of all time. We gather today in pretense of unanimity and concord to croon over Doug's ashes and grab for scraps of his robe. Everyone here will, of course, say they're carrying on his work by whatever twisted interpretation. I, for one, carry on his work by keeping the links outside the file, as he did. Some are no doubt here to cheer and march behind the mouse, as in the opening of the Mickey Mouse TV Club of yore. Let them be happy in that celebration. But the real ashes to be mourned are the ashes of Doug's great dream and vision that we dance around in the costume party of fonts that swept aside his ideas of structure and collaboration. Don't get me wrong, the people who gave us all those fonts were idealists too, in their way. They just didn't necessarily hold a very high view of human potential. I used to have a high view of human potential. But no one ever had such a soaring view of human potential as Douglas Carl Engelbart. And he gave us wings to soar with him, though his mind flew on ahead, where few could see. Like Icarus, he tried to fly too far too fast, and the wings melted off. The melt-off began after the great demo of 1968. His team dispersed to seek fortunes elsewhere, and he was subordinated to an artificial intelligence department where his real intelligence was stifled. All too soon, the augmentation research center was gone, fobbed off on an aircraft company. He was cast out for the next 30 years into the endless spiral of what they call in Hollywood development hell, trying to find backing. Let us never forget that Doug Engelbart was dumped by ARPA, Doug Engelbart was dumped by SRI, Doug Engelbart was snubbed by Xerox PARC, and for the rest of his working life, he had no chance to take us farther. But for Doug, that great demo was only the beginning. That great demo which defined the corners of our world was only square one of his endless new checkerboard, the great playing field, the great workplace of sharing, cooperation, and understanding he sought to create. And alas, that only he could imagine. Just as we can only guess what John Kennedy would have done, we can only guess what Doug Engelbart might have done had he not been cut down in his prime. Perhaps the dynamic knowledge repository he imagined, the DKR, would not be feasible in a real-world corporation. Perhaps his notion of accelerating collaboration and cooperation was a pipe dream in this dirty world of organizational politics, jockeying and backstabbing and euphemizing evil. Of course he was naive. Gandhi and Martin Luther King pretended to be naive, but Doug was the real thing. A luminous innocent, able to do in all innocence what sophisticates could not, would not dare. But that naivete accomplished a dazzling amount in those few years of his Augmentation Research Center, even as the knives were being sharpened for him. Did he actually have any more great inventions under that halo? We'll never know, will we? Doug hoped eventually to take on all the urgent and complex problems of humanity, dealing with them in parallel because he saw as the true and final challenge. Could he have done it somehow? Given us exalted, radical tools for optimization and agreement in this urgent, complex world of hurt and hatred? We'll never know, will we? But who better should have had the chance to try? To quote Joan of Arc from Shaw's play about her, when will the world be ready to receive its saints? I think we know the answer. When they are dead, pasteurized and homogenized and simplified into stereotypes, and the true depth and integrity of their ideas and initiatives are forgotten. But the urgent and complex problems of mankind have only grown more urgent and more complex. It sure looks like humanity is circling the drain. To quote the great poet Walt Kelly, "The gentle journey jolts to stop. The drifting dream is done. The long-gone goblins loom ahead. The deadly that we thought were dead are waiting, every one." And here we twiddle in a world of computer glitz as the winds rise, and the seas rise, and the debts rise, and the terrorists rise, and the nukes tick. So I don't just feel like I've lost my best friend. I feel like I've lost my best planet. I'll give the last word to Shakespeare's Mark Antony. He speaks to the body of Julius Caesar while he's confronting the gang that murdered him. Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Thank you.
On a lighter note, I thought I was sort of going into a Department of Defense world when I was invited over to SRI to sort of help them out with this thing they were going to do at some conference. And I got into the offices, which we heard described, and I saw a poster for Janis Joplin. It's probably over Dave Evans' desk. I thought, okay, something else is going on here, and it was. And I think part of the story of the 60s and 70s was augmented human intellect was an ambition of many people, and various tools were used. The crowd I was running with was using psychedelic drugs to see if we could augment our intellect that way. Well, we augmented many things, but intellect was probably not one of them. And I'd seen, when I went there in early 1968 to join this merry band who was working up on NLS, I had seen some years before the beginnings of space war, the Stanford Computation Center in 1962, I guess it was. And what I'd seen there was when people are confronted, there's a wonderful demo of this downstairs in the demo room, with a new tool with new capabilities, in this case the PDP-1, with a nice interface and the beginnings of time sharing coming on, and video display. And Space War was invented by Slug Russell and the others kind of as a, what cool thing could you do with this new tool? It was not a vision, it was an emergence from the apparatus and from the inventive young minds that were playing with the apparatus. We see a lot of that. What was different that I saw with Doug's version of augmented human intellect was a very complete and impatient vision that was impatient for the tech to catch up to what the vision wanted to accomplish. The density of the ability to completely fly through your data with other people flying through the same data with you in real time. And that pulled not only in the apparatus itself, but this demo together. The reason it's the mother of all demos is because they'd been jamming at the limits of the possible, at the impossible really, for quite a while. And to make that hour or so of amazing things, one after the other, fly at the Fall Joint Computer Conference in '68, was the result of this vision-driven approach to making something happen. They pushed the tech way beyond what was possible. They pushed it so far beyond that, though you don't see it in the demo, all kinds of things were going wrong in real time. And they were able to improvise by the density of the communication and the sheer mastery of the material that everybody involved in the demo, including Doug, had, that they could just proceed right on as if everything was going smoothly and as if they had rehearsed it 20 times, when they had rehearsed it exactly 0 times. That was all happening real time, and they had made the equipment come up, the tools come up to the capability. I was not at the San Francisco end. I was down in the Menlo Park end running a camera, shooting pictures of a hand on a chord keyboard and things like that. And it went on for quite a while. And then it sort of stopped. And we asked the guy who was on the headset, is it over? Yeah, it's over. Well, did they like it? Just a minute, I'll ask. Yeah, they liked it. Thank you.
Good evening. I met Doug back in 1990. I was a graduate student at Stanford University, and in the engineering department. And what we were studying engineers with the goal of replicating them, which engineers do, or automating engineering. And one of the references in the work we were looking at was the augmenting human intellect. And so I thought, well, let me try and find this article. I didn't find it in the library. And then I was told that, well, recently Doug had donated his collection to Stanford. And I went over to the Green Library to ask if I could look through the collection. And I thought I'll just spend maybe 2 hours looking for the paper I wanted. I spent the next 2 weeks in the library. And the amount of work he had done was just amazing. It was the comprehensiveness of his vision compared to what we were looking at was just mind-boggling. So I spoke to the librarian, Henry Lowood, and said, this man, Doug Engelbart, where can I find him? So he gave me Doug's number and told me to call, I could call him on a Friday. So I called the number, and Doug says, oh, come over, boy. So I go over on Monday, and what was very interesting was the way in which this was at Sweet Hall, and I went over to meet himself and Christina, and for the next 3 or 4 years, we started working on the bootstrap project. The bootstrap project was a project to help the evolution of both the human and the tool system. And those of you familiar with Doug will know that he keeps using his hands to illustrate what he's really working on. So he said very simply, the rate at which problems in the world is growing is like this, and our human capabilities is like this. We ought to do something to catch up with the problems. And he wanted, through the bootstrap workshops, to bring both the folks working on the technology and the social side to come together and collaborate. Those workshops were very frustrating because when we get the folks on technology side, they didn't want to talk to the folks on the human side, or got the folks on the human side, they didn't want to talk to folks on the technology side. So co-evolution was quite a challenge to do. But one of the things that Doug taught during that time was a very simple quote where he said, if your ability to innovate in the world is proportional to your ability to tolerate embarrassment. And that was very interesting because then one of the other things he brought, because he was also focused on the idea of augmentation. So he tied, some of you may have seen the piece of brick that he tied to a pencil and used that to illustrate de-augmentation. Finally, one of the things that we've been working on has been the co-evolution of the tool and human system. And I am working on a project in India, and I just come back. So I saw Doug on Friday, Doug and Karen, and I was just talking to him about my experience in India. Because several years ago, I'd met a man from India called Dwakoji, who said, well, he was trying to merge spirituality and science. And he said, well, you folks in the West, you have explored the world, and you have a whole geography of the world. But that we in India, we've also explored the inner world. and there is a geography of the inner world. And there on Friday, when I sat with Doug and Karen, I looked into Doug's eyes. And what was clear to me was it was like a light from within shining through that gave him that visibility of a vision of the future. That in a sense, what a lot of the spiritual traditions urge us to do is how we can shift the ego to the side. And here was Doug that the furthest you can see, the more humble you will become. And it was such a very, very moving moment. And the next thing Doug asked me, "So Ade, what's your name again?" And I said, Ade. I think one of the things that this occasion calls for is that we need to recommit to this vision of collaborating with each other. That bringing both the human side and the technology side together is the way we can co-evolve. Thank you very much.
I'm Paul Sappho. 15 years ago, I hosted an event at Stanford called Doug Engelbart's Unfinished Revolution. And as I was thinking about this evening, I realized we really picked the wrong title back then, because the revolution that Doug imagined isn't merely unfinished. Even after a century, half a century, it's hardly even begun. His vision, augmentation, was really nothing less than a new home for the mind, as we all know. A cathedral, if you will, and cathedrals take time. Doug realized that before he could build his cathedral, he had to build the tools he needed to build the cathedral. That was a path where, as Ted once quipped about his own work, a wrong time ago I took a long turn. But he built good tools, and after the 1968 demo, others were tempted to borrow them, and Doug shared freely. By sharing, he hoped they would help move his cathedral closer to reality. What everyone built was lovely, but it was no cathedral. And frankly, even though they thought they were helping Doug, what they built distracted attention from the cathedral and Doug's ambitious goals. His reward? Before, in the 1950s and early 60s, he was simply considered crazy. Then in the 1980s, he was considered out of touch as everyone turned around and took his tools to build small things. Which brings me to the first of two stories, parables, if you will, the parable of the bicycle and the fire truck. Now, many of you know these stories, so I will be brief. But I first heard the parable of the bicycle in 1984. I was sitting in Doug's office on Bandley Drive. He'd been sold off twice, first by SRI and then Timeshare, and was sitting in complete anonymity 2 blocks away from a company that was making a small fortune off of his mice. And I asked him how he felt, and he responded in classic Doug way. He was wistful, not angry. And he told me, well, it's really not my revolution. It's not networked, it's standalone, and that's not a building block for augmentation. And it was also not user-friendly. Now, we know that Doug was not into simplicity. I once asked him, how come there's 3 buttons on the mouse, Doug? And he said, well, the switches were so big. He would have put 24 buttons on that mouse if he could have. And I said, well, how many commands can there be in NLS? And he said, well, at least as many as there are words in the English language, because, of course, what he was building was something that had the richness of human conversation and the precision of an engineer. Anyway, the story was the personal computer. His objection was we were building tricycles when we should build 10 speeds. A tricycle is something like a user-friendly machine that you can get on instantly and roll around on, but you'll never go very fast. It's only if you put the effort into falling down on a regular bicycle that you will ever have true efficiency. That was cathedral thinking, and so at odds with 1980s Silicon Valley. Innovators were plucking out shiny bits from Doug's work, and all the while ignoring the vision of the cathedral right in front of them. Quite simply put, we were standing on a whale, fishing for minnows. While all around us, the challenges facing humanity were becoming ever more complex and urgent. And worse yet, our fascination with our shiny new toys was blinding us to what lay ahead. And Doug's reward? He went from crazy to being overlooked, and then worst of all, being considered part of our history. There is something worse than being ignored. It is being treated with kindness. Meanwhile, the information revolution advanced. We finally figured out the importance of connection with the diffusion of the internet and the arrival of the World Wide Web. Some of our new gizmos even became important new tools for solving humanity's problems. We felt pleased, secure, carrying on Doug's work. Still no cathedral, but at least we were solving some of the world's problems. And that brings me to the second story, the parable of the fire truck. Many of you recall when Doug and Ballard's house burned. Started in the kitchen, burned down half the house. If the fire trucks had been on time, they would have only lost part of their kitchen. But the fire trucks were just a few minutes late, and they lost half their house. The problem is that fire trucks accelerate arithmetically, fire grows exponentially. Even as the firefighters raced to the scene, they were falling behind. Just like today. We live in an age of exponentials, exponential risks as well as opportunities. The cozy, comprehensible world of the Cold War is gone, replaced by a vast, uncertain, exponential terrain. The arms race has been replaced by the brain race, and honestly, at moments I feel like we've been unilaterally disarming. But above all, we are like those firefighters. As we put our foot on the gas, we think we're catching up to our challenges. In fact, we're falling behind. The time is short, the risks are growing, the stakes are higher than ever. More than ever, we need not merely Doug's tools, but Doug's vision of the cathedral. As you leave tonight, ask yourself, what can we do to carry on? I think the highest task we can undertake is to ensure that all of Doug's work, all of the documents ever created from the many teams and many efforts, are made available on the web, where the next generation of builders, itinerant visionaries, and world changers can stumble across them and be tempted to borrow from them, and who knows, maybe they will help build the cathedral.
I'm truly honored that we are able to hold this event for Doug Engelbart. Today, we spend far too many hours at the kind of interactive screens Doug demonstrated in 1968. As he foresaw, we do much of our reading, writing, and research online. We click on the hypertext links he developed using the mouse he co-invented. We chat and share documents and send emails as his team did back then. We do all of this over computer networks, including the internet, both partly developed within his laboratory at SRI. But when it comes to the kind of knowledge navigation and collaboration tools that were the heart of Doug's system, we've climbed only the first rung of the ladder. The same is true, or worse, when it comes to the daunting goal that drove him to build all of his technology, to augment human intellect so that we might better address the world's big problems. Are those unbuilt portions of his vision useful today? If so, is it too late to incorporate them into an online world that is already largely constructed without them? Can his goals be turned into concrete action items today? These are questions we need to explore, and some of the kind the panel will begin to address a little later. I first met Doug when my colleague Kevin Hughes and I interviewed him at his house in 1996. He'd been introduced to us by the web's main inventor, Tim Berners-Lee. We were deeply proud when Doug agreed to keynote and to demo NLS at the Web History Day and exhibit we held the following spring at the International World Wide Web Conference. One of our main goals was to introduce the earlier online pioneers to the web community, especially the young engineers who were building things but had little idea of what came before. We also opened the event with a wake-up call from Ted Nelson via video link from the UK. We were starting the Web History Project at the time, which in several ways led to today's CHM Internet History Program. Doug was very supportive of our early effort and participated in talks with Stanford, the Internet Archive, and this museum, which was just moving out from Boston. The web was really starting to explode in those years, and as I remember, it was a bittersweet time for Doug and some of the other pioneers who had conceived of an online world back in the 1960s. For the first time, the general public had some concrete sense of what they'd been working on for so long. But from their point of view, the web was a very, very limited version of the original vision, missing all kinds of core features, really very crippled. I got the sense it felt to him and other pioneers like one of those fairy tales where the genie grants the letter of your wish, but with some awful twist. The CHM Internet History Program, which I run, records the history of computer networking, including the web, the internet, and mobile data. It is one of the first comprehensive efforts in this area by a major historical institution. And the program covers networking as both a technical invention and a new kind of mass medium. The main existing records of Doug's work are split between the museum and Stanford libraries. The records here include many hundreds of boxes of papers, software, photos, video objects, and more from his Augmentation Research Center and the Associated Network Information Center, which was headed by Jake Feinler. To offer or to suggest other relevant historical materials, please get in touch with me. You can find contact information in your program. SRI International and Jake Feinler have established a fund with the CHM Internet History Program in the museum to support the preservation of materials related to Doug's work. If you would like to contribute, again, please find the info in your program and be sure to specify that your gift is for the Engelbart Memorial Fund. I'd like to read a tribute from Vince Cerf, who is in the UK and regrets that he can't be here tonight. Vint writes, Doug Engelbart was a giant in our midst. His vision spanned decades, and his aspirations exceeded even today's hopes for the future of computing and the human intellect. Despite the powerful facilities found in today's internet and World Wide Web, Doug's expectations lay beyond all of them toward the development of a collaborative intelligence that would produce an effect that was greater than the sum of its parts. We can best serve his memory by striving to reach the horizon he could see if others could not. Bob Taylor, who funded much of Doug's early work, also regrets that he can't be here with us tonight. He recorded a video tribute, part of which is in the movie you'll shortly see. Other excerpts will be posted online. And now I have the privilege of introducing Guerrino De Luca, chairman of the board of Logitech, and previously their president and CEO for many years. Logitech provided facilities for Doug Engelbart's Bootstrap Alliance starting in the late 1980s, and they generously supported the film we are about to see. Please welcome Guerrino De Luca.
I probably am one of these companies that made billions of dollars with, I feel a little bit, I have a bad feeling about that. I think I'm here because of that, but I think I'm also here because of the Bootstrap Institute and the privilege I had to spend almost 10 years side by side with Doug when he was developing his ideas and in the buildings where we worked, and he was he became a friend of everybody. He loved to talk with the engineers, loved to talk to the IT people, was amused at the working of a company, and we had regular one-on-ones, and I hope he enjoyed them as much as I did. I was confronted with forecasting and reducing cost, and here's this visionary that was telling me about how to augment a collective IQ, and every time there was food for thought, and I was honored to have been associated with him. I think we did our job in developing a fractional part of Doug's ideas, and he was actually somewhat upset of being tied with the mouse. I mean, the mouse was a very small incident in the vision of Doug, but we sold 1.5 billion mice since, and yes, and we're very happy of that incident, but I completely agree with the general tone of the more intelligent people that have spoken before me, which is that the industry has become intensely personal, and he was collective. Now, collective carries this notion of socialism that makes it kind of unpleasant to many. But in truth, the problems are bigger, and certainly a thinner tablet or a more intuitive touch screen won't make it easier to solve. So I agree with people that believe that the revolution hasn't even started. And every time I was listening to Doug, I was tempted to do something to make the vision happening, and I didn't. It wasn't my job probably to, and I had to run a company that had to deliver profits and growth, and at the time it did, and it's restarting to. But I think that collectively we can begin the process of making that dream come through. So Doug Engelbart, this video is a tribute to him. Thank you very much.
Douglas Carl Engelbart is a key pioneer of the kind of computing we do today: interactive, connected, graphical, and personal. As a Navy radar operator in the Pacific, he had read Vannevar Bush's famous article, As We May Think. Its ideas would help flesh out the vision that became his life's work: to augment human intellect with techniques for collectively organizing and refining knowledge.
I suddenly wondered, hey, what kind of goals should I have for career? And then for some reason, within 5 minutes, what popped in my head was, what if I try to maximize the value my career has to mankind? Oh, that sounds good. I have no idea where it came from. Mankind isn't getting all that much more effective at collectively dealing with complex problems. Maybe that's what I could concentrate on. So that's what I committed to.
I first learned of Doug Engelbart in 1961 when I was a program manager at NASA headquarters in their Office of Advanced Research. And a proposal from Doug came across my desk proposing to work with computers in the development of information, not numbers, not arithmetic, but information. Engelbart's proposal was the first concrete manifestation of this idea that I had seen, so I funded it right away.
In 1968, Doug's team at SRI showed off many core features of modern computing for the first time in the so-called mother of all demos. There was a new kind of pointing device.
I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way, and we never did change it.
There were windows, hypertext links, collapsible views, and other features for navigating information.
If I want to, I can say, the library, what am I supposed to pick up there? I can just point to that, and oh, I see, overdue books and all. Well, there was a statement there with that name on it. Go back.
He showed online collaboration, including document sharing, messaging, and video conferencing.
I say, now computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill. You can see my work, you can point at it, and I can see your face, and we can talk. So let's do some collaborating.
Engelbart's lab hosted the Central Network Information Center for the ARPANET and later the Internet.
A forthcoming involvement is this ARPA computer network, the experimental network that's going to come into being in its first form in about a year.
Engelbart's team practiced a process he called bootstrapping.
And this item down here is the term bootstrapping applied in a slightly new sense. We're applying that to our approach, where we're saying we need a research subject group to give them these tools, put them to work with them, study them, and improve them. We'll do that by making ourselves be the subject group and studying ourselves.
A number of NLS's technical ideas eventually got picked up by mainstream computing: the mouse, word processing, Windows, and simple hypertext links. But the more sophisticated ways of navigating knowledge in NLS were forgotten, from collapsible views to integrated browsing and editing. Most of Engelbart's ideas for improving how organizations function and thus raising their collective IQ also got left behind.
One of the big things we talk about the potential is the kind of a collective intelligence. So if you look at something that you could call a social organism, an organization, and realize that if you drew an envelope around it and watched how it interacts with the outside world, you'd pretty soon be able to get some sense about what kind of IQ it has in it. Like how well does it understand what's going on? How quickly and subtly does it make a decision? How well does it marshal resources, and how smart a plan does it make? And so how well does it learn what's going on, and how well does it generate new knowledge and creative IQ?
A key concept was how computer tools and human organizations could co-evolve. He spent the rest of his career trying to promote his larger vision. With his daughter, he co-founded the Bootstrap Institute, and mousemaker Logitech donated facilities. He hoped to start a snowball effect of innovation, improved techniques enabling further improvements, and so on.
I began to think about the improvement process, etc., and then I realized, probably every organization that's going to change has an explicit category of activities. That one of them is doing your everyday work, and the other one is improving your capability to do that work. And that everybody's sort of sitting at a certain capability level, and there's a capability frontier out there because the technology is booming ahead and all kinds of options for how you change your learning and your human system. So, hey, it's a whole unexplored frontier.
What can we learn from Engelbart's unfinished revolution today?
In our final chapter tonight, we have two people who are going to help answer that question, or at least peer into the future just a bit. Adam Shire is the co-founder of Siri, and the engineer whose original vision of an AI-driven personal assistant as the project director of the Kalo PAL program at SRI brought that revolutionary technology about. He is also co-founder of Change.org, the social network for social change, which carries on many of Doug Engelbart's philosophies in other ways. Kurt Carlson is the president and CEO of SRI International. He returns to our stage tonight after having previously been here as one of our revolutionaries to discuss the ways in which the augmented human experience remains central to SRI's current research and future plans. And conducting this conversation is this year's Pulitzer Prize winner in journalism, John Markoff of the New York Times.
We're going to look forward, but before we look forward, I wanted to spend a little time looking back, particularly because I first met Doug as a cub reporter at InfoWorld in, I think, 1982, when he was in that wilderness period, which he was thrown into. And that's the way I've thought about it. That's the way I wrote about it in Dormouse. But I was reading something today that I wanted to share with you, and I thought, maybe we're looking at it in the wrong way. Maybe that's not the way to look, and then maybe we should engage in a little revisionist history here. I found this wonderful document today. It wasn't on the web. Investments in Tomorrow, Winter 1975, SRI publication, Window to the Office of the Future. And in the middle, there's a section about Doug entitled Computer Invades Executive Suite. And on the second page, it has, where's the second? Trojan horse, typewriter with memory paves way for computerized office. And it just struck me in particular because there's this bitter federal intellectual property suit involving egghead software going on right now in East Marshall, Texas, over the invention of internet commerce, or of electronic commerce. And there's just this one section I just have to read. It's subtitled, A Computerized Marketplace. The implications of these capabilities for the business world in the last years of this century are obviously profound. As profound, Engelbart believes, as the effects of railroads on the cottage industries of the 19th century. At one time, he notes, every town had its artisans who supplied it with products that today are made at centralized factories and shipped throughout the world. Engelbart expects a new computerized, quote, marketplace, unquote, to evolve that will represent, quote, fantastic wealth in the commodities of knowledge, service, information, processing, storage, etc., in the number and range of transactions, and in the speed and flexibility with which they are negotiated, quote, he says. Quote, this market will have a vitality and a dynamism as much greater than today's as today is greater than the village market, unquote. This computerized marketplace will encourage specialization, he believes. Some individuals or small groups will provide libraries of information, all arranged for convenient use. Others will offer interactive programs, specially tailored for particular types of analysis, or doing the text graphic document topography in a special area of technical portrayal. So it was all there. There's another section, 21st century middlemen. Obviously, there will have to be brokers, wholesalers, middlemen, retailers, and bankers to make this computerized marketplace a working reality. And here it really is driven home. There will be a need for procedures and systems to assure privacy. See, for example, quote, Profiles of a Computer Criminal, Investments in Tomorrow, Spring 1973. So nothing's new under the sun. This was all there. And I was thinking about it in the context of Adam and your friends being thrown out of SRI 3 decades later. You know, this is under the new entrepreneurial SRI that Kurt created. But maybe it was inevitable that Doug would be thrown out. Maybe you know, it was just a question of timing. Maybe timing really is everything. Or as my friend Paul Sappho likes to say, never mistake a clear view for a short distance. Maybe it was impossible that Doug could have done what he did at that time. And so, you know, it's easy to say, you know, he was tossed out. Maybe that vision was impossible for the time, and there was no way that Doug could have done it. Maybe SRI could be criticized for not nurturing him for another 30 years. But so you came back and you sort of reinvented SRI over the last couple decades. What could you have done differently with Doug?
Well, Doug, I've been at SRI now 15 years, and when I first came here, I came from the East Coast, and as you all know, the East Coast is 10 to 15 years behind here. And I really didn't know the Doug story. And I, of course, as soon as I came to SRI, I learned about Doug and what he had done with the mother of all demos. And I, of course, wanted to meet Doug. But I also wanted to learn how he did it. You don't create the greatest demo ever, before or since, by accident. You only do something like that by thinking in a profoundly new, more powerful way. So when I met Doug, that was kind of my mental framework that I wanted to understand. And of course, as you all know here, that's exactly how he thought. He did have that very different conceptual framework in his head that led to those amazing discoveries. So I actually brought him back to SRI. In the last years of his life, he was at SRI, working at SRI. Doug is a very complex character because those of you who sat with him knew you could never outvision him. You know, you would do your most. I'm going to go 50 years out, Doug would go 100. And they say, I'm going to go 100. No, and he'd go 200. You know, you couldn't get there. And when Doug was doing his seminal work, it was a very happy coincidence of great sponsors like Taylor, who really saw what he was doing, and a brilliant team. I don't think, you know, people like Bill English and the other folks who were on Doug's team were geniuses in their own rights. And all those ingredients came together in that one magic moment when they could pull everything together and make that demo happen. It's, you know, it's a little bit like putting the band together in the Blues Brothers again. It's not so easy to do. And I would say we were lucky that Doug was able to do it even once, because it really is a miracle to pull those things together. I'll say one more thing about this, if you don't mind. Please. When I learned about Doug, the part that interested me, probably more than the technology, was the human side of it. How do you get human beings to collaborate with that kind of intensity for that length of time, and do it, as he said, out of love, not out of some kind of punitive approach. In fact, I would say you can only do it out of love. You can only do it if you have enormous respect and have great human values. Will people collaborate in such a powerful way? And everybody has commented on the fact that we all love Doug. You had to love Doug. And he engendered that in other people, and he engendered that in his team. And the values side of innovation, I don't think is talked enough about, and how he was able to inspire his teams. And so I took on the study. I was actually with Paul at the Unfinished Revolution. I gave a talk on that at that event because I wanted to understand how we could take Doug's ideas and best instantiate them into SRI. And it's been really my life's work the last 15 years is to take Doug's ideas, using different terms, because terms like bootstrapping are a little hard to explain to people, and bring them into SRI and have us, to the extent humanly possible, you know, because none of us are Doug's, but in our own way be able to use those principles. And certainly Adam is an exemplar. I would say what Adam did with Siri, you know, was almost the second mother of all demos. He has to tell you about that, but what he and the team did at SRI was the biggest AI project in the history of probably the world, was another really tour de force. And I think you should answer this, but I think you were inspired by Doug then as well about how to do that, right?
Certainly. I met Doug probably 17, 18 years ago, and I was a young man at the time. And I had the...
Were you already at SRI?
I was at SRI. Yeah. And I had all the optimism of youth that I can do anything, you know. And I first met him. He goes, yeah, I had this little, you know, we had this system. It's not quite finished. I want to work on it. I'm like, well, just tell me what it was. I'll whip it up in a weekend. I can code. I can do stuff. And so I started learning more and more about what he was about and what this vision was. And I kept going, oh. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I realized he taught me, you know, all that impatience of youth that I think he never quite got through with. Over time, you know, I really have two threads of my career. I had in 1993, you know, you have heard of Siri. I had in 93 a tablet that had on it that you could use speech recognition, and we didn't have the touch gesture, but we had pen recognition. And you could do all of the functions that are now available through Siri today, just about maps and office control. And I thought it would just happen. You know, I realized the patience I've learned from Doug, I'll be working on it for another 40, 50 years, just like he has.
You've also taken on a challenge. There was this discussion about the tension between the humanists and the technologists. And in change.org, it's one of the examples of this effort. I guess, were you motivated by the idea of coevolution in change.org directly?
So, absolutely. So I had set out as a young man in 1993 with this idea of kind of a Siri-like thing. And that has been a life's work, and it will continue as a thread. But after I met Doug and learned a little bit more about what he was about, and his team, I started a second parallel thread. So for the past 20 years, I really have had this duality of how can you make machines smarter, more intelligent in AI, and how can you make it about people? How can people collaboratively work together better? And initially, you're like, well, those aren't really at odds, but there is a tension between the two. And I kind of, as I work on my AI side, I'll call it, I've always harbored this guilt in a way that you mentioned. Doug got thrown out. It wasn't that he got thrown out. It's that funding, in my view, shifted. So in the 60s, it was all about, we're going to take this numerical computation and try to make it about building tools for people, and people will be able to do incredible things. And then in the early 70s, it came around and said, well, wait, computers are so good, who needs the people? We'll fund AI, it'll do everything for us, we just sit back. And so all the money, the funding left from the people to about the machines. And I've kind of lived with this duality, some guilt, and in the same way through my life, but exploring the intersections of the two.
Well, step back. And when I first started to look at this history, when I did research for Dormouse, I was really struck by the fact in 1964, there were two laboratories set on either side of the Stanford campus that basically created interactive computing. One of them was the Stanford AI Lab. At that point, John McCarthy believed that you could build a working AI with human-level intelligence in a decade. That was their goal. That was what they were funded to do. You take humans out of the loop. And on the other side of campus, Doug Engelbart set out to augment humans. And I actually believe that that has been a tension inside computing since then. And all of a sudden, we're at this point where AI is having these great strides, where in the 60s and 70s it did nothing, and then it failed in the 80s. And now all of a sudden, the things that people envisioned are happening. And so designers today can make decisions. They can design people in, or they can design people out. And to my mind, Siri is one of those great examples of designing people in, and it goes right back to Doug. But as a designer today, do you have an ethical responsibility? And how do you save Doug's vision in that context of keeping people in the loop when these technologies are making such great progress?
So, it's an interesting progression. I think, you look at people, Terry Winograd was a big AI guy, and when you look at the progression of his career, I'd say he's kind of gone more towards a Doug, human-computer interaction side. So there is tension, there is evolution. For me, it's a subtle pull. Can I make the machine better, smarter? But I'll tell a little story with Siri. So, we started this little startup company, and we wanted culture. So we handed out picture frames to everyone in the team, and we said, pick a hero, someone who inspires you, and a quote that, and this would be a reflection of each person. And the two co-founders, Tom, who's here, and myself, we were kind of fighting over, who gets to have Doug as their hero, in a sense. And Tom had done a lot of the knowledge work at Introspect and other starting company. We were both very much inspired, but here we set out with a vision to create a system that can be AI-like, human-like, based on the Kalo project you referred to, which was the biggest AI project in history. But every day, my picture of Doug reminded me to put humans first, that Siri is a tool. It's only about how can people accomplish tasks more quickly, especially in this mobile environment, which is slow and painful. And that really was the vision. There was a video that's been circulating the web the last day or two, about 50 things Siri can do. And I think it's, don't know who did it, but it's really well done. But if you look at this type of video, you'll see all of the ways. It's not the system is going to do it all for you. It's going to work in this collaborative way with people to be an extension, an augmentation of their capabilities. They're in control, but being able to do things all around the web. And so I say, yes, Siri is definitely was greatly inspired by the Doug vision, while kind of dancing this very fine line of we're getting into that arcane magic that is AI.
You know, this idea of coevolution between tools and people is a really hard one. If you're an engineer, the tool part of it is the natural part. The human part's the hard part, right? They're messy and they don't behave properly and they've got IQs and that are off the charts and egos and all that kind of stuff. And Doug, again, mastered the ability to get those teams first to work together so they could accelerate the learning process to create new tools to keep on doing this. So bootstrapping is just keep this going. The other part of it is to have a focus on the user. So you're co-evolving not only with the team that's developing this stuff, but also the customer that's out there. You can't get too far ahead of that. And having that kind of dual perspective is a very, very rare thing. A very rare thing, because it's so hard to think about people at the same time. I told John before this, when I think about Doug's work, I also think, you know, this is all about knowledge creation. Innovation is about creating new knowledge, right? The bigger the idea, the more knowledge it's created, the more sustainable it is. So Doug has created sustainable knowledge that's going to last forever. Forget the mouse. That's not the most important thing. He's changed the world in profound ways. And he actually was prescient, not only in terms of the words and the language he used, but in terms of actually what's become major areas of behavioral and learning sciences. Because that's what he was doing. He was saying basically, how do you learn really fast? How do you learn exponentially in an exponential world? If you're not learning exponentially, you're not going to keep up. So all of his tools were aimed at exponential improvement. And I just wrote down some of the big concepts that are being studied all the time now in education. Experiential learning, you have to do. Doug's teams did that. Complementary teams. We all have different points of view and perspectives that can be uniquely valuable. You have to bring them together and tap into those complementary teams. Radical collaboration. With Doug, you had to iterate hourly, and you had to show it to your buddies, and if you worked all night, you had to tell them what you'd done in the morning, and it just never stopped. It was just really radical. Productivity tools, of course, right? And that's part of the coevolution part of it. So he went beyond this, but I'm just giving you a different framework about learning. Challenging incentives. Doug wasn't giving people big salaries. He was giving them the chance of a lifetime to work on something of existential importance. What a motivator that is, right? And he had the magic gift to get people to buy into that. And the last thing I would say, again, is human values. Because if people don't respect each other, they're not going to collaborate with that kind of intensity. It just won't happen. You can't do it. You cannot have an exponential team if you don't have people with great values. And so much of the media gets this wrong. They don't understand that the really great people have to find a way to balance this. And Doug was the exemplar of this. Nobody, again, has done all of these things as well.
I wanted to ask Adam a little bit about going back to technology. When I was doing research for Dormouse, one of the things that I stumbled across was the NLS Journal, which now occupies, I think, something like 400 linear feet at the Stanford Library. I mean, it's the absolute opposite of a dynamic digital knowledge repository. And I hope, I mean, I spent 2 weeks in it, and I realized it's a dissertation. At least a dissertation is there, or maybe it will be digitized. But you know, now we do have dynamic digital knowledge repositories. They're everywhere, and you have a sense that they're not usable. And I mean, what got lost in the emergence of can you bring it back?
So I think, so Doug had a term he called Kodiak, which was concurrent development, integration, and application of knowledge. And so what he meant by that, and what I take this to mean, was that people could live in this environment, in this digital environment, and it wasn't, you know, and they would do all their work there. When I try to explain, you know, augment and LS to people of today, I go, well, do you remember Emacs? It's this text editor. Well, it's not just an editor. It's actually the place you lived. It was your shell script. It was you actually had email inside of Emacs. You had, and everything that you used to live in that world. And I remember in the late 80s, Windows 3.1 came out, and it was this huge advance. because now all the menus used to have the same file menu, and you had a dialog box, and that was a huge advance. But I realized, how many editors do we have in the world? Boom, I've got my code editor over here, my email editor over here, my word processor over here, and they're all separate, and they all have different commands, and they all, I have to go to a million places. And what Emacs had, and what we learned a little bit tonight about augment, there was a command language, and you could apply your principles and your tools throughout everything you did. So you can imagine the developers of the system, the people working on it, the software engineers, they were living in the system. So that means every idea they had was captured in the environment. Every bit of code they wrote, every requirement that they had, every bug that they filed, and it was all inherently surfable and viewable and displayable and searchable and shareable and manipulable. And I think one of the things that's lost in today's internet, do we have web pages? By the gazillions, right? But you can't really edit them. You can't integrate and work dynamically in this environment. And someone else did that, so I can't change it. And all the editors that we have, they don't talk to each other. So there's something very subtle. I mean, you can't point to say, well, we have hyperlinks, we have wikis, we have this, we have lots of things. But in some ways, we have too many things. And when we exploded into 1 million programs rather than having one Uber program, which is where it started, I do think there was something lost in the integration, because you don't live in it anymore. Yes. It's out there and you poke at it. Right. But you're not doing your deep knowledge work in that way.
Is there any way back?
I think it's a subtle piece, so I think there are ways back. One thing I know, the Computer History Museum, with people like my brother Jonathan and others, actually got a version of augment running through endless layers of emulation. I think Ken did some of these. And so he could, there's a version of the software that people can touch and see. I would love to see them get out and put that into the world, just to kind of learn, what does it mean to be in this? But ultimately, I think my own plan, I've hatched this secret plan for how to get Doug's vision out there. It's like, and I had worked with Brad Newberg and Eugene Kim and others on what they called hyperscope, which was trying to take all that stuff, those pages out there in Word documents, try to make them Doug-like readable. I don't think that's enough, because you're missing the integration. I think we need to create an environment, find a new seed community. I would pick software development, because then you get the bootstrapping effect. Build a brand new integrated development environment where you capture your requirements, you do your code, you file your bugs, and you do it in a tool sense. And I think today's software world is so fragmented, you could actually say we can augment and accelerate software development, and enough new developers would come in if you kind of marketed it in the right way, and you could start kind of recreating a big enough space where you could live in it for everything you do, and then bring back some of Doug's things. But I don't think we can take it's gone too far out. I think you have to start again from something core and scratch and build up. That's my view.
So a comment on that, because I think that's a really insightful point about why it's so difficult. Now, what do you think the collective IQ of this room is tonight?
1 million.
At least 1 million. Seriously, at least
maybe
1 million.
Maybe a Google.
Yeah. It's a lot. But suppose you all spoke different languages and you couldn't work together. That's the world that Adam just described. But if you can get an environment where we can all work together and we can tap into the collective genius of this team, then we can make much faster progress. That was Doug. He wanted everyone to be able to add their particular genius to solve these problems. And it's the only way you can go exponentially fast enough. You can't go if people are disconnected and you can't collaborate at a distance and do all the other things you need to do in today's world.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, I think the simplicity crowd has kind of taken a beating tonight. And I actually feel bad about that, because I think there's a bit of history there that is slightly distorted. But the show and tell part of the evening, This is the original chord key. These are from Hugh Daniels' estate. John Gilmore gave them to me to bring. And I also think, I mean, Paul said 24 buttons. I think it was closer to 10, but there just weren't room because the switches, there wasn't enough space. But Bill Duvall, who's not here tonight, actually learned to type 55 words a minute with a chord key in one hand. And Doug taped it to the dashboard of his car so he could practice while he was driving, which was early distracted driving, right? So he was ahead of us in so many ways. But wow. What about that tension between simplicity and complexity?
I just want to say a quick word about that. So I've had the privilege to work with two great geniuses of our time, you know, Doug on one side and Steve Jobs having gone to work at Apple. And there you see two very different viewpoints. You know, people would say, well, you know, on the iPhone, there's only one button, you know, the button, right? And Siri actually got that button. People would say if Steve could get rid of that button, he would. He wants simpler. Why 2 when you can have 1? Why 1 if you can get rid of it? Yeah. And I actually believe at some level he thought of Siri as a way of getting rid of the button. You just talk to it, right? No buttons needed. Forget typing. So there is this tension, and yes, you want simplicity. And I don't think Doug was against simplicity, and I think we heard, you know, this vision. What he wanted was maximal performance. And if you can achieve maximal performance through simplicity, well, great. You know, if it takes a little bit of work, that's all right too. And today people spend, you know, a lot of hours to learn how to use a QWERTY keyboard, which is work, you know, to touch type. But why are we using the QWERTY, which was designed by people who wanted to slow down keyboards so that the keys wouldn't strike together? So that's why the keys are positioned in as terribly a position as possible, so the keys wouldn't strike together. We're still using that. If we're going to spend all the time working to learn touch typing, why don't we design something that would get better performance? So, you know, the question, can you be performant and simple? It's very, very hard. On which side do you go? Do you go from ultimate simplicity, 1 button or even no buttons, to how many buttons you can cram onto that thing? You know, it's a very tricky thing. I think I'm more on the Doug side myself.
But they did have something really fundamental in common, which was they were always looking for the most basic, the most fundamental principles, the most powerful principles. So with Steve Jobs, it was, I'm going to make this so simple, you're going to have to rethink this so that you have really isolated the most powerful, effective things that will make this work. And by the way, it'll also be easier for users. Doug wasn't simple in any sense of the word, but he was, boy, was he fundamental. He was, I mean, his point of view was so strong and so compelling. It, you know, he had a genius IQ, but what made him a super genius was this incredible perspective, these fundamental principles that are, they're undeniable. If you know anything at all about signal processing or any of the information sciences, if you want to learn really fast, you have to do it basically the way Doug described it. If you're really serious, you have to do it the way Doug described it.
So we're coming up against 9 o'clock, and I wanted to sort of ask one last question of Kurt. And there's one insight that Doug had. Actually, in some ways, it was one of his first insights that we haven't talked about tonight. And you know, when the integrated circuit was first invented, Doug was working with Bill in a magnetic logic group, and they quickly realized that that was, at least for them, the end of magnetic logic. But Doug had another insight, and he had that insight largely because he worked in the wind tunnel as an electronic technician at NASA Ames. And what they did in that wind tunnel is they built small models and they scaled them up. So remember, it was Gordon Moore who coined Moore's Law in what would become Moore's Law in 1965. But Doug actually saw that a half a decade early He gave another talk with Bill in Philadelphia where he talked about scaling. And he really had a profound early insight that there was going to be an infinite amount of computing power in the world, enough computing power to do what he set out to do. And he went ahead to do it. And I think that's kind of been lost. But how often do insights like that come along? I mean, do people at SRI see that frequently, or is that once in a century?
Well, we see it a lot, but that was pretty remarkable at the time. But I do think it was one of those insights that profoundly affected him, because he immediately understood the power of exponential. And he had to find a way to improve exponentially, which is what his whole philosophy of computing and developing tools and bootstrapping and all that was about. How do you improve exponentially to solve the exponentially hard problems in the world today? So all these little pieces you pick out of Doug, you see this very fundamental way of thinking about things, and it gets applied multiple places. But SRI is a very special place, and I must say personally, almost every day I am just flabbergasted by something that somebody tells me about something. So
Changed the world in a number of ways.
Yep.
So thank you very much, both of you. And we're going to close the evening with Christina, Doug's daughter, who's going to talk about taking the challenge forward. So thank you.
Hi, and thank you all for being here. And I've just been so touched by everything I've heard tonight. So just an amazing celebration of my dad. So growing up with Dad was an adventure. He was creative and resourceful. He would entertain us with games that he made up. He was quite a creative storyteller, and he enchanted us with countless science fiction stories at bedtime that he made up himself on the spot. He was adventurous. He had that hill climbing spirit. He took us hiking, camping, canoeing, backpacking, bike riding. He was a natural connector of people and a quiet organizer around his passions. So he and Mom loved entertaining and had many friends over a lot. Their passion for folk dancing, he enticed many of their friends to join and organized the teaching in a way that promoted really lasting bonds. A number of those people are here tonight. Always the unassuming country boy, as we've heard already. Kids and adults alike found him approachable, warm, friendly, unassuming. They felt a personal connection, and he somehow made each one feel special. More than a few wished their own dad were more like him. He also had a deep sense of empathy, which fueled his genuine desire to help the world. This big quest to save the world started in the early 1950s when he got engaged to my mom. He reevaluated his life's goals, and he got his first big epiphanies, where he envisioned dramatically more powerful ways that humankind could lift itself up by its bootstraps to a whole new level of existence, and computers would be the vehicle for that rapid evolution. It's commonly said that he was at least 30 years ahead of his time, but this big quest he envisioned for the future was so real to him. It's not a big stretch to imagine that he was sent to us from the future. A future where a vast percentage of the organizations across all sectors perform brilliantly every day, working together effortlessly and seamlessly, using highly evolved methodologies and technologies perfectly adapted to each task, and whose group mind was as quick and agile as the human mind, but way smarter. These organizations were leveraging collective intelligence to its fullest potential, and society thrived as a result. But it wasn't always like this. This enlightened era was preceded by an era known as the Second Dark Ages, which came about when the rate of change was accelerating exponentially on a global scale, causing increasingly disruptive change across all systems: economic, political, social, and environmental. Public and private organizations alike were increasingly ineffectual in this environment. The warning signs were unheeded, resulting in widespread collapse and suffering, with enormous cost to society and the planet. Luckily, in the nick of time, they had this aha moment that the core competencies they needed to clean up this mess and thrive as a planet were, number one, to leverage their collective intelligence to better anticipate and solve complex, urgent problems, and two, to continuously raise their collective IQ to get ahead of that curve exponentially. They took this as a grand challenge with industry-government cooperation. A promising young engineer developed a strategic process to accelerate the progress with a multiplier effect that multiplied the multiplier effect. That's with the coevolution and the bootstrapping. With this, they were able to turn the whole thing around on a path to reach the highest level of human potential. So after they got their act together, after much deliberation, they sent an adventurous, creative, resourceful engineer named Doug back in time. The same engineer who had authored that crucial strategic process. His mission? To get that aha moment to happen way sooner. He could help them chart a direct path to a brighter future that would skip over that yucky part. Doug quietly established himself as a researcher, assembled a small team, and led the expedition, starting with whatever rudimentary technology was then available. Using this strategic process to guide the evolution with its built-in accelerators and multipliers, in a short time they made huge progress, breakthrough after breakthrough, which they demonstrated in 1968. Doug reported back to the future, "All systems go." Famous last words. He fully expected to take off with a critical mass that could spark a collective IQ revolution. Instead, his work did spark a revolution, but the one he was launching has yet to unfold. He was celebrated for his lesser work, while his most brilliant work, his big idea, was all but thrown out with the bathwater. He didn't give up, though. He approached me to start the Bootstrap Institute, which we did together, and went on to seek out more receptive audiences and develop workshops and management seminars and mini expeditions. But it was always hard to, it was really a challenge to get the kind of participation that was needed to really get something going. The most heartbreaking for him was not to see his vision realized, knowing the lost opportunity cost to society. Here we are 45 years after that demo in a different time and place, and we've got this grand challenge he left us in our keeping. So now, in his honor, we can rise to the occasion and commit to meeting that challenge, even if we're not completely sure how. The Doug Engelbart Institute invites you to come be part of the solution. You can join us at www.dougengelbart.org to learn more. Click on Giving or Get Involved, and that will take you to a page that lets you know how to get involved. So the first thing you can do is post a tribute to Dad. We have a new tribute site where you can post share your thoughts and memories and experiences and how you were touched by him. Join the discussion. We want to hear from you. Subscribe to our newsletter, volunteer your time, post your questions, share your ideas and links to related initiatives. Point us to organizations, more organizations like SRI and Change.org that are doing brilliant work in this area, and nonprofits that are especially effective. In the first quarter of 2014, we plan to announce the Engelbart Grand Challenge with awards and recognitions, and you'll find a preview on the website. There will be a category for organizations, for software developers, and research topics for universities and school kids. So there's something for everyone. And we're putting the finishing touches on a getting started exercise you can do called How We Are Already Meeting Part of the Challenge, because a lot of organizations already are doing some of these things at least a little bit. Which has already been answered by a rural school, the Rural Girls' School in Uganda, and by a university consortium. On the technical side, we have Dad's list of what's needed in the information technology to support a rising collective IQ, most of which is still largely unmet in today's technology. Let's look at his top picks and start with that. And lastly, since we are at the Computer History Museum, a lot of selected pieces from Dad's prior work are available online on our website in our archive exhibit area, including videos from key lectures and interviews, and actually over 100 videos of lectures and interviews, and lots of key texts and about 1,000 photos. So we're making some progress, but as you heard with the work that Jake is doing here, there is a lot more. And when you talk about somebody who had 50-year career exploring and all the best you can do with knowledge management and repositories and all of that kind of stuff. Everything was kept and everything was organized in particular ways. And so how you archive those, how you get those into digital and get the context set so that it makes sense to people why it's even important. So just in closing, the best tribute I think that you can make to Doug Engelbart is to start doing, meeting his challenge. It makes good business sense, it makes a brilliant world, and if that's not enough, just do it for Doug. Thank you.